This year, Mr Deputy President, marks the 6th anniversary of the horrific terrorist attacks on 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand that took place on 15 March 2019. These attacks have had long-lasting effects on the Muslim community internationally, as recognised with the establishment of 15th of March as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia by the United Nations. This year, the International Day has fallen during the holy month of Ramadan. To coincide with the International Day, the Islamophobia Register, together with Monash University, released their 5th report on Islamophobia in Australia earlier this month. In the history of the Islamophobia Register's reporting, this year of reporting covering from January 2023 to the end of November 2024 had the highest number ever of in-person and online incidences of Islamophobia. This includes verbal and physical assaults as well as property destruction. The most common victims of Islamophobic attacks were found to be women and girls. New South Wales had the highest number of in-person incidences across Australia, with New South Wales also having the largest Muslim community in the country. Incidents have had long-term impacts on many of the victims, with testimonies including, "My children were hurt and upset," "We are traumatised and worried about being in public spaces," and "The incident occurred 1 week ago. I feel traumatised and extremely anxious. I have had panic attacks and nightmares. I have also been unable to work." The additional lines I'm seeking to add to my motion acknowledge the disturbing number of recent threats to mosques around Sydney, including the Australian Islamic House Masjid in Edmondson Park, the Imam Ali bin Abi Taleb Mosque in Lakemba, and the United Muslims of Australia Centre in Padstow. These acts must be called out strongly for what they are, that is, Islamophobic and hateful. There's no place for prejudice in New South Wales, and people have the right to go to their place of worship without fear. I note that the threats are being investigated as a matter of great urgency by the New South Wales Police, and a Western Australian teenager has been arrested in relation to the threats to the Australian Islamic House Masjid in Edmondson Park. I want to thank the Islamophobia Register for the important advocacy work they do, noting that they also offer support services to the victims of Islamophobia who come into contact with them. I also note the federal government will soon receive recommendations from the Special Envoy to Combat Islamophobia, Aftab Malik, on how it can be better addressed. I want to also acknowledge the advocacy of the Australian National Imams Council, particularly its president, Imam Shadi Asuliman, who raised the importance of recognising the International Day to Combat Islamophobia with me. The New South Wales Faith Affairs Council said it best in their statement acknowledging the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, and I quote, "In commemorating this day, we call on people of all faiths and none to respect the diversity of beliefs in our state. Each of us has a responsibility to build trust within our multicultural and multi-faith communities." The United Nations, Mr Deputy President, defines Islamophobia as a fear, prejudice and hatred of Muslims that leads to provocation, hostility and intolerance by means of threatening, harassment, abuse, incitement and intimidation of Muslims and non-Muslims, both in the online and offline world, motivated by institutional, ideological, political and religious hostility that transcends into structural and cultural racism. It targets the symbols and markers of being a Muslim. And Mr Deputy President, I commend the motion to the House.
Thank you. Further speakers? Ms Kate Fairman.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant President. I rise to support the motion put forward by the member. Indicate the Greens will support it, as well as the amendments that have been moved. In the past year, there's been a significant increase, or the past 18 months has been a significant increase in the number of Islamophobic attacks being reported across this country. The motion refers to the report by the Islamophobia Register of Australia, compiled by researchers from Monash and Deakin universities, which found that Islamophobic attacks have more than doubled from January 23 to November 24. Released on the 13th of March, the report consists of data from hundreds of reports made to the Islamophobia Register of Australia, as well as an examination of 18,000 social media posts shared on X. The findings are really shocking. Like previous reports, gender was a prominent feature of Islamophobic attacks. Women accounted for 75% of all incidents. Muslim women and girls were 95% of the victims of reported incidents on public transport, 83% of reported incidents on the street, parking or driving, and were 100% of the victims of spitting incidents. These statistics are confronting, and the stories shared by members of the Muslim community are abhorrent. But the report's authors believe these statistics are an underestimation of the true extent of Islamophobia in Australia because, of course, they're underreported. On the 4th of March, Sydney's newest mosque, the Australian Islamic House Masjid Al-Bayt Al-Islami in Edmondson Park, reported an online threat made against it on a social media platform, with the user saying, "About to Christchurch 2.0 this joint," referring, of course, to the 2019 Christchurch terror attack. Then, of course, in December last year, Mr. Ihab Elia was flying a Palestinian flag on his truck, and it was set on fire outside his home. From actively discouraging vigils in solidarity with Gaza to rushing hate speech laws after the Dural Caravan incident, the political response to the war, much of it at the insistence of powerful Zionist lobby groups, has only further served to fuel division and turn a blind eye to the extent of attacks on people and institutions of the Muslim faith that are happening every single day in this country. The Zionist lobby wants to bring down anyone who dares stand up for the rights of Palestinian people, who dares call what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza genocide, and Benjamin Netanyahu and his cronies in power war criminals. It's disgraceful. This motion condemning Islamophobia is so important in this climate.
Thank you. Further speakers? Honourable Aileen McDonald.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Islamophobia is not just fear or misunderstanding. It is a form of racism. It targets individuals because of their religion or appearance, and it can manifest as abuse on the street, online hatred, discrimination at work or in education, and even violent threats. And it's rising. On 15th of March, we marked the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, a day that coincides with the anniversary of the tragic Christchurch attacks, where 51 Muslims were murdered while at prayer. This is a day not only of remembrance, but of resolve, to reaffirm that every person in New South Wales, regardless of their faith, has the right to live free from fear and hatred. Islamophobia and racism, more broadly, are persistent and destructive forces in our society. And as the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Mark Speakman, SC MP, said in recent correspondence, we must stand together to stamp out hate. New South Wales is home to some of the most vibrant and diverse communities anywhere in the world, and that is something we must cherish, not fear. That's why the recent obscene and reprehensible threats made against mosques in Edmondson Park, Lakemba and Padstow are so deeply disturbing, especially during the holy month of Ramadan, a time of prayer, peace and reflection for Muslims. Using the memory of Christchurch as a threat is not just hateful, it's dangerous, and it must be condemned. But in the face of hate, we've also seen great strength, communities rallying together, interfaith leaders standing side by side, and everyday Australians speaking up for respect and unity. And I want to relay a story during Second during the Second World War, there's a lesser-known story that speaks to this spirit of solidarity. In Albania, a Muslim-majority country, hundreds of Jewish people fleeing Nazi persecution were protected by Muslim families at great personal risk. They were sheltered, hidden, fed and kept safe. The reason? A deep cultural code called Beza, meaning to keep a promise. These families believed it was their moral and religious duty to protect those in danger, no matter their faith. The story reminds us the antidote to hate is not just tolerance, but friendship. It's standing up for one another. It's saying your safety, your dignity, your freedom to worship, that matters to me. That's what we need now. We need to listen to the lived experience of Muslim Australians, particularly women and young people, educate in our schools, workplaces and communities to break down stereotypes, and lead by standing up against racism and Islamophobia, whether it's subtle or not. I support the motion and stand with our Muslim communities, not just today, but every day.
Thank you. The Honourable Anthony Dadham.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise to make a contribution to this debate and thank the mover for bringing it forward today. We all recall with horror the 15th of March 2019 when 51 people were murdered and 89 people were injured in Christchurch. A horrific event, one that has left a scar on Muslims across the world. I'd start by just wishing to convey my condolences to all those who lost family and friends in Christchurch and to the Muslim community for their loss. But I think we need to remember that while the event occurred in New Zealand, the perpetrator was a product of Australia, and that there's something dark, I think, festering in Australian culture, in the media debate around the place of Muslims in this country. And I'm very disturbed by a statistic from the research of the Scanlon Institute into Social Cohesion, which found that 1 in 3 Australians express negative attitudes towards Muslims, more than any other religious group. Let's just pause for a moment to consider why that might be. I think there's something about the public discourse around the role of Islam in our society that is engendering this type of hatred. Islamophobia is real, despite the fact that some people want to deny its existence. It's unfortunately, part of the lived experience of Australian Muslims. And I want to commend the work of the Islamophobia Register because they do that critical work in terms of documenting the incidents, even though we know that many incidents go unreported. We've seen, a 250% increase in online incidents of Islamophobia and 150% increase in in-person incidents reported in the most recent Islamophobia Register report released just last week. This is very disturbing. And I think the other thing that's also of great concern is the gender-based nature of many of these incidents, with 75% of victims being women and girls. Obviously, there is a physical marker in terms of Muslim women wearing the hijab, that obviously presents a target for those who have malicious intent, and clearly, as documented by the Islamophobia Register, this is providing a target. And I think we should recognise that we need to combat Islamophobia wherever it rears its head, in every instance, and we all have a duty to make sure that in our comments in public that we're very careful not to engender hatred towards Muslims.
Thank you. Dr. Conn.
I also add my support to the motion that we recognise the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. The 15th of March is the anniversary of the terrorist attack committed by an Australian white supremacist in Christchurch, murdering 51 people. The recently released report from the Islamophobia Register Australia and Monash University is an alarming read, and I encourage my colleagues to read it if they haven't already. Islamophobia in Australia is on the rise, and in particular it's worth noting the 510% increase in Islamophobic incidents reported since October 7, 2023. The report describes statistics and chilling examples of physical and verbal assault against Muslim Australians, and as my colleague Kate Fairman has described, a disproportionate impact on Muslim women and girls. Mosques are being threatened with violence, racist graffiti is an increasingly common occurrence, and Muslim Australians have lost their jobs or been demonised in the media for holding legitimate political views opposing the actions of Israel in Gaza. About half of the reported incidents in this national report occurred in New South Wales. Our state is home to the largest population of Muslim Australians. This has not been responded to with the urgency it deserves from the New South Wales government or the federal government. We in the New South Wales Parliament are absolutely part of the problem, and I've heard disturbing Islamophobia expressed in debate here in the 2 years since I was elected. Similarly, allowing rhetoric that blames migrants and communities of colour for a housing and a cost of living crisis that successive governments have failed to address allows racism in the community to flourish. Yesterday, the federal government handed down its budget. They have a blueprint for how to address racism in this country in the National Anti-Racism Framework from the Australian Human Rights Commission. The framework contains 63 recommendations for a whole-of-society approach to eliminating racism, with proposed reforms across Australia's legal, justice, health, education, media and arts sectors, as well as workplaces and data collection. This budget was an opportunity to show that the government is serious about addressing this, but there was no mention of it in the Treasurer's budget speech and no additional funding for the implementation of the framework. I know that the Parliamentary Secretary for Multiculturalism takes his role very seriously. This motion is extremely welcome, and it must be the start, not the end of the action this government takes to address Islamophobia in New South Wales.
Thank you. Honourable Mark Latham.
Thank you, Deputy President. There's a sameness about this debate. We have these debates on a regular basis, and I always wonder how successful is a parliament or a government in telling people you're naughty, don't do something, whether it's gambling or racism or some other form of social attitude. We don't seem to have a lot of success there because the reputation of government is not strong. Our agencies like Multiculturalism New South Wales tend to be part of that. They tend to have some outreach programs that actually don't reach very far or have much of a result. I think on this question of relations with people of Islamic faith, it might be wise for the agencies and the government to try a different approach. Now, people get most of their values and views from lived experience, okay? Not the finger wagging of a government or a parliament, lived experience. Now, on the local scene, there's not a huge amount of contact between people born in Australia of an Anglo background and Islamic. There's a bit, but it's not a big feature of our society. Probably the thing that shapes values the most is perceptions about the Middle East. And of course, what's happening now in Gaza and the controversies around Israel, whichever side of that debate you're on, your average Australian doesn't look at it very favourably. You know, my father, may rest in peace, a long time ago used to say, oh, these problems overseas, why don't they all put them in a big paddock and let them fight it out? Well, unfortunately now that's kind of what they're doing in Gaza, and that still is a bit of an Australian attitude. What I'd like to see is some effort by the government through these agencies who do what I always think of as do-gooder programs to take a different approach, and that is to say and promote the idea when we look at the Middle East, it's no longer desert, sand and oil. In fact, there's an argument now to say in the Middle East the dynamic city economies of Doha, Riyadh, Dubai and Abu Dhabi are more advanced than ours. These are very dynamic, effective, productive economies, these city-states. They're phenomenal, how quickly they've been developed and built. And there's an argument to say to the Australian people, we sort of historically have an attitude, I don't want to express it too crudely, but the reality is people say, well, we're superior to them. They're out there in the desert, all they live off is oil, that's their only source of revenue. That perception is wrong. And we should change it by promoting the idea that these 4 city-states there in particular are more effective and dynamic than our economy. And we can no longer regard people from the Middle East as somehow inferior to the Australian way of life and our wealth and standards of living. So how about we give that a try rather than finger wagging? You know, back in the 90s, we used to talk about the 4 Asian tigers of Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong and Taiwan. We should be talking about the 4 Middle Eastern dynamic city-states that are way ahead of us, and perhaps That's our best hope for changing some of these unfortunate perceptions.
Thank you. The Honourable Cameron Murphy.
Thank you, Deputy President. And I too rise to speak in support of this motion. And, you know, to pick up something that the previous speaker just said, I think it's inherently obvious and very important that part of the process to stopping Islamophobia, which is growing at an alarming rate, is about education. That's got to be central to this, and rather than finger wagging, as it was put, it's about educating people. The first step, though, is recognising that there's a problem, and there's clearly a problem here. You know, the Islamophobia in Australia, report number 5, sets it out with staggering clarity when it talks about massive increases in the Islamic incidences that have been reported, 250% increase in online incidences, 150% increase in-person incidences year on year since they've done this report. And the sort of things we're talking about in terms of Islamophobic incidents are mostly incidences focused against women. The reason for that is pretty obvious. They're probably the most easily identifiable people as Muslims in public. Someone wearing what is clearly Islamic dress, sitting on a bus or a train, that then becomes the target of some pretty awful, vulgar commentary. Some of the things included in this report, as they say, women are disproportionately targeted, accounting for 75% of all the victims, including a 79% of verbal abuse cases, 60% of physical assaults, right through to other people in the community that are simply expressing their right to protest. One of the most alarming incidences to me was one where we had a guy that was simply flying a Palestinian flag on his property when some unknown individual then left an improvised petrol bomb on his front bonnet, windshield of the car. And it's things like that where somebody's singled out because they are Muslim or somebody perceives them to be Muslim and then targets them in a way that demonstrates an underlying hate for that person's culture. We've got to stamp this out, and we need to do more in terms of police investigation, but we do need to do more in terms of education and awareness. The first step is recognising the significance of this problem, one that's only growing, but also making sure that we as members of Parliament and public officials do what we can to say this has to stop. We've got to stamp out Islamophobia in Australia. I commend the motion to the House.
Deputy President, I rise to contribute to the debate and draw attention to a deeply disturbing incident involving off-duty New South Wales police officers and the failure of the New South Wales Police Force to appropriately investigate clear allegations of Islamophobia and hate speech. This incident, which has now been reported by The Guardian Australia, involved off-duty police officers gathered at a home of a serving police officer in Glenmore Park. What began as a dispute about pool water flowing into a neighbour's property escalated into what the complainant has described in their own words as hate crime, harassment and trying to intimidate us. The complainant details that after asking them to stop flooding their property, they started yelling Allahu Akbar at different times. On one occasion, one person said Allahu Akbar, boom, and then another time, many people yelling together very loudly Allahu Akbar and then mentioning Hezbollah. This was not a random outburst. This was in front of serving New South Wales police officers who were guests at a party. The complainant rightly asks, are the police allowed to promote a terrorist organisation when they are off duty? Did Officer S and his mates, the police officers, breach their conduct by yelling? What they are alleged to have done. These are serious questions. These words were not innocuous. They are a deliberate invocation of racist, Islamophobic tropes. The neighbour and their family were labelled, targeted and threatened based on their religion. The complaint was made, footage was provided, and the police response? Dismissive. The investigators' conclusion, the chanting you heard was not directed at you in any way. It was banter between friends. Banter. Since when is invoking racist and Islamophobic tropes in front of your Muslim neighbour considered banter? The complainant is right to say, if I was the person who said to them what they said to me, we would be arrested and it would be a big headline in the media, a terrorist threat. But because they were police, it's waved away as harmless. This is Islamophobia, and it is deeply embedded. The family asked for the matter to be referred to the police commissioner. The officer responded that it would go instead to her assistant manager because she's a very busy lady. The commissioner, the premier and the minister spend plenty of time in front of cameras telling the public that we don't tolerate hate crimes. But when it happens from within the force itself, it's ignored. This family deserves answers. They deserve safety. They deserve accountability. We cannot turn a blind eye to Islamophobia, especially from those who wear the uniform.
Thank you. The Honourable Stephen Lawrence.
I wanted to make a contribution on the debate, and I commend the mover of the motion. It is important. I've seen a bit of commentary of late in the right-wing media, particularly on Sky News, about whether Islamophobia is real. I certainly think that it is real, and I remember going to my local mosque after the Christchurch massacre with a number of other councillors, and it was harrowing indeed to hear the stories that we were told. And I remember distinctly being told by a number of men there that their women had been harassed in shops in Dubbo. These were people speaking in front of their own community. I have absolutely no doubt that it was true. I was shocked to hear it, and this is indeed a real thing. I think it's worth thinking about what causes it, what the origins of it are. Most Muslim people are people of colour, so I think racism really bleeds into this. I think also that people's perceptions about Islamic extremism or fundamentalism also has an impact on it. But the reality is all religions have their extremists. There are Christian extremists, there are Hindu extremists, indeed even Buddhist extremists. And I remember reading about the civil war in Sri Lanka and about Buddhist extremists there. You can go through the texts of any religion, of course in particular the ancient ones, and find things that rather are able to be lent to an extremist purpose interpreted in a particular way. This is not something that is unique to Islam. What I think is particular to Islam in a sense is just the incredible social, political and economic changes that have taken place in the Middle East over the last 100 years. I don't know that there's any part of the world that has had the transformation that it has had, and I think that in a way has generated a lot of extremism and fundamentalism because people seek to use religion always as part of politics. It's hard to separate the two, and in countries where there's these extreme shifts happening and political contests on, I think religions are much more likely to get manipulated and taken to extreme degrees. I don't think Islamophobia is talked about enough. I don't think the Muslim community in Australia has the political power, the clout that other communities have. I don't think it suits certain people's agendas and political narratives and geostrategic issues and interpretations to talk about Islamophobia as much as they do about certain other things. And that's why I commend the mover of the motion for bringing this really important motion at a really important time.
All right, thank you. Any other further speakers? The Honourable Mark Buttigieg in reply.
And I want to thank all members for what has been a very thoughtful contribution to a good debate. That is Miss Kate Fairman, the Honourable Aileen McDonald, the Honourable Anthony D'Adam, Dr Amanda Conn, the Honourable Mark Latham, the Honourable Cameron Murphy, Miss Sue Higginson and the Honourable Stephen Lawrence. I think what came out of the debate, and I say it was very positive, good contributions from all members, is that if we do not take these sort of things seriously, in this particular case Islamophobia, on the commemoration of that day, you can run the risk of a nation or indeed a state giving cultural licence to the idea of multiculturalism and tolerance, which we value so much, you can give cultural licence for people who do not necessarily subscribe to those views to undermine it and create disharmony in society. And unless we are vigilant, both as a government and a peoples, in stamping it out whenever we see it, and that's what this motion's about, it's what previous motions have been about for other groups previously, then we run the risk of that happening. And in the lead up to the federal election, I hope this stuff is not used either tangentially or centrally in either of the campaigns, because it does have a tendency to be used for political opportunism from time to time. I think that in a lot of ways these things are not new. When I was growing up, I remember the stigma that the so-called wogs would have to put up at school with, and having lived through that and remembering the humiliation that you feel when those sort of things are perpetrated, I can only imagine what some of these people are feeling, some of those disgusting and vile incidences which are in that report that was mentioned during the debate, how they feel as well. And I do think the Honourable Mark Latham made a good point about lived experience and the racism and the looking down at our nose at other countries from time to time, thinking we're superior. I do think that's a big part of it. But a lot of this is about understanding that people come from different perspectives too. And it's all right for us as Australians to say, leave your troubles where they are, but the fact is that people come to this country from a number of different experiences and perspectives, including oppression, including famine, including war, and we have to respect that as a peoples here and know that they bring those experiences to us and empathise with them, because they make us stronger as a whole when we can put ourselves in other people's shoes. So I commend all the contributions to the debate. I'm very gratified that it looks like the motion's going to get supported, and commend the motion to the House. Once again, I thank the report authors and Sheikh Shadi for bringing this to my attention.
Thank you. The Honourable Mark Buttigieg has moved private member's business item number 1771 as by leave amended. The question is the motion be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.